Welcome to this explainer, where we are going way beyond the standard translations you might be used to. Today, we're uncovering the hidden depths of Genesis chapters 3 through 5, and we're doing it by looking directly at the original Hebrew text. We're going on a linguistic journey to see how understanding just a handful of original words can absolutely transform our grasp of these ancient narratives. Let's get right to it.
You know, you might think you already know the oldest stories of humanity backward and forward. But honestly, when we actually look at the original Hebrew, what we find changes pretty much everything. Take the very first verse of Genesis 3. The English text usually describes the serpent as subtle, but the original Hebrew word there is arum. And that doesn't just mean being quiet or a little snaky. Arum carries this heavy weight of being cunning, highly shrewd, or even sensible. It implies a really high level of calculating intelligence. Understanding that sets a completely different, almost chilling stage for the interaction that's about to follow.
All right, bringing us to Section 1, Decoding the Garden's Deception.
So, let's dive into this first chapter, Genesis 3, where humanity's story shifts from this intimate obedience to subtle rebellion. Genesis 3:6 doesn't just describe a sudden mistake or some momentary lapse in judgment, not at all. Instead, it outlines a highly methodical, three-step sensory seduction of the woman by the tree's fruit. It's almost like a formula. First, she saw it was good for food. That's a purely physical appeal. Second, it was a delight to the eyes, an aesthetic appeal. And third, it was desired to make one wise, an intellectual and spiritual appeal. It's a complete, systemic breakdown of boundaries on every human level.
Which leads us right into Section 2, the anatomy of exile.
The consequence of this act introduces a massive existential shift in the human story. Right after they consume the fruit, God seeks out the man. And what's fascinating is that God's immediate response isn't this booming statement of wrath from the clouds. It's actually a profound, seeking interrogation, perfectly encapsulated in a single Hebrew word, ayeka. Translated into English, it's "where art thou?" And this single word holds just incredible narrative weight. I mean, it is literally the very first question asked by the divine to humanity.
But here's the absolutely crucial point. This isn't about physical location. God didn't somehow lose track of the humans behind a bush in a geographical sense, right? The text is forcing humanity to answer the ultimate existential question regarding where they stand after crossing the line. It's asking, where are you morally and spiritually? And what you should really take away from this is how the original text invites the reader, meaning us today, into that exact same profound self-reflection. Where do you stand?
Well, the chapter ultimately closes with a pretty intense, grounding reality check. God tells the humans they'll eat bread by the sweat of their face until they return to the ground. Why? For out of it was thou taken, for dust thou art, and unto dust shalt thou return. The Hebrew word for dust used here is afar. It's a really sobering reminder of humanity's earthly origin and our inevitable mortality outside the garden. And this heavy consequence perfectly sets up everything that unfolds in the chapters to come.
Let's move on to Section 3, the cry of sibling blood.
So as we move into Genesis 4, the narrative pace suddenly shifts to this dramatic urgency. Humanity expands outside Eden, setting the stage for literally the very first societal conflict. The text contrasts the two brothers, Cain and Abel, by their professions. Abel was a keeper of sheep, and Cain was a tiller of the ground. Right away, this establishes a foundational tension between the pastoral and the agricultural lifestyles, and for the ancient audiences originally hearing this text, that tension was incredibly real and relatable.
Then, of course, comes the tragedy. When they're out in the field, Cain rises up against his brother and slays him. And this moment brilliantly illustrates a terrifying mirror to the garden story we just talked about. Just as God asked Adam, "Where are you?" God now asks Cain, "Where is Abel, thy brother?" And Cain's famous, chilling deflection is just the ultimate denial of relational responsibility. He says, "I know not. Am I my brother's keeper?"
But God's response pierces right through that lie. God says, "What hast thou done? The voice of thy brother's blood crieth unto me from the ground." Now notice the devastating irony here. Cain, the tiller of the ground, has now corrupted the very earth he works with, the blood of his own brother. The ground itself literally becomes a witness against him.
Okay, now here is a linguistic detail that is truly staggering, and it completely gets lost in standard English translations. The original Hebrew word used for blood here is dmei, and dmei is actually plural. It literally translates to bloods. Why plural? Well, it brilliantly illustrates that Cain didn't just kill Abel,
By taking his life, he extinguished all of Abel's future unborn descendants as well. The text is vividly showing us that a single act of violence echoes through entire generations. Just a mind-blowing detail.
Which brings us to Section 4, Generations, Mortality, and Mystery.
Finally, let's look at Genesis 5. This is a structural chapter that settles into a really rhythmic, almost philosophical cadence spanning centuries. The chapter begins by zooming out and reiterating the creation of humanity. It points out that God created man in his likeness, male and female created he them, and crucially, God called their collective name Adam. So Adam in the original text isn't just a single guy's name. It's actually the term for humanity as a whole.
From there, the text acts as this long historical bridge. As we map out this timeline from Adam all the way down to Noah, the chapter emphasizes the rhythmic certainty of human mortality. The phrasing repeats over and over like a drumbeat. Someone lived. They had a child, they lived some more, and he died, and he died, and he died. Tracing this inescapable reality makes the narrative feel incredibly grounded. But one figure stands out as a distinct, fascinating outlier, right in the middle of this lineage.
Breaking that monotonous repetition of death that follows every single other patriarch, the original text offers this mysterious and poetic exception for Enoch. Genesis 5:24 says, "And Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him." Notice it doesn't say, "and he died." It introduces this profound mystery into the text, suggesting that maybe, just maybe, a life walked in close proximity to the divine might somehow transcend that ultimate earthly consequence of returning to the dust.
This journey from chapters 3 to 5 is just remarkable. We started with humanity's exile to the dust, witnessed the tragic spilling of blood into the ground, and traced the mortal generations, only to find this amazing spark of mystery with Enoch at the end. So, as we reflect on humanity's journey from dust back to dust, let's leave off with a final provocative thought based on God's very first existential question in the garden. If the original text asks, Ayaka, where are you? How will history translate your answer? Thank you so much for exploring the depths of this text with me today. Keep asking questions, keep looking deeper, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.